The announcement for boarding Group A blared over the speakers, cutting through the chaos of the international terminal. My mother, Angela, didn't even look at me. She was too busy shepherding her new husband, Kevin, and his two perfect children toward the gate. When I stepped up, the gate agent frowned. "Invalid," my mother gasped, "a performance worthy of an award." "Oh no," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "It must be a system error, Alexis. The ship is full." She didn't argue. She didn't ask for a manager. She just reached into her purse and shoved a wad of crumpled bills into my hand. $85. "Take a cab back to the house," she said. "We'll sort this out when we get back." And then she turned around and walked through security, without glancing back once. Before I tell you what I did with that $85, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from right now. Have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? I want to hear your story. I stood there for exactly 3 minutes after they disappeared through the security checkpoint. I didn't scream. I didn't run after them, begging to be taken along. Crying implies surprise, and looking back, I wasn't surprised. I was just finally seeing the composition clearly. For years, people have asked me why I didn't make a scene right then and there. Why didn't I throw myself on the floor or call the police? It's because cruelty, when it's administered in small daily doses, doesn't feel like an attack. It feels like the weather. My mother hadn't just decided to abandon me today. She had been erasing me by degrees for my entire life. It was the missing lunch money in 3rd grade. It was the forgotten parent-teacher conferences. It was the way she looked at me like I was a smudge of charcoal on her otherwise pristine life with Kevin. This ticket glitch wasn't an error. It was the final transaction in a long-term divestment strategy. She had finally liquidated her last asset from her previous life, me. The airport swirled around me, a blur of happy families and stressed businessmen, but the noise faded into a dull hum. I looked down at the $85 in my hand. It wasn't enough for a cab back to the suburbs, and even if it were, I knew the house would be locked. The spare key under the mat had been removed 2 days ago for security. I was stranded. I walked over to a quiet corner near a vending machine, the air smelling of burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. I sat on my duffel bag and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the contacts list. For 10 years, my mother had painted a very specific portrait of my father, Richard. She called him a monster, a tech-obsessed sociopath who didn't know how to love anything that didn't have a circuit board. She had restraining orders, court documents, stories of his volatility. She had sketched a caricature of a villain so terrifying I couldn't see the man beneath. But looking at the exit sign above the terminal doors, I realized something. If Angela was the good parent and she just left me with less than $100 in an international terminal, then the bad parent couldn't possibly be worse. I opened the blocked contacts folder. I had saved his number from an old legal letter I found in the trash years ago. I stared at the digits. This wasn't just a phone call. It was a breach of contract. Calling him meant nuking the only life I had ever known. It meant admitting that my mother wasn't just flawed, but dangerous. I didn't hesitate. I pressed the call button. The line rang once. Twice, a click. "This is Richard," a deep voice answered. It wasn't angry. It wasn't volatile. It was calm, precise, and terrifyingly familiar. "It's Alexis," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I'm at the airport. She left me." There was a silence on the other end that felt heavier than the entire terminal. "Stay exactly where you are," he said. "I'm coming." The curb outside the International Arrivals Terminal is usually a war zone of honking taxis and desperate travelers. But 10 minutes after I hung up, the noise stopped. A convoy of 3 black armored SUVs cut through the traffic like sharks through a school of minnows. They pulled up right in front of me, ignoring the no standing signs. The rear door of the middle vehicle opened and a man stepped out. He wasn't the monster from my mother's stories. He was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Angela's entire vacation budget. His face was sharp, intelligent, and lined with a kind of weary intensity. He looked exactly like the one photo I had hidden in my jewelry box. "Alexis," he said. His voice cracked just a little. I didn't run to him. I was still frozen, still holding my $85. He walked over, knelt down so he was at eye level, and looked at me as if I were something precious he had lost a decade ago. "I'm here," he said. "You're safe." He didn't hug me immediately. He waited for me to nod. When I finally did, he wrapped his arms around me, and for the first time in 16 years, I felt like something other than a burden. I felt protected. We got into the SUV. The interior smelled of leather and cedar. It was quiet, insulated from the chaos outside. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Home," he said. "Real home." We drove for an hour, leaving the city behind, winding up a coastal highway until we reached a massive iron gate. It opened silently. The driveway led up to a cliffside estate that looked more like a modern fortress than a house, glass, steel, and concrete perched on the edge of the world. It was impenetrable. Inside, Richard led me down a long hallway to a door at the end. "I never touched it," he said quietly. "I knew you'd come back eventually." He opened the door. It wasn't a guest room. It was a sanctuary. The walls were painted a soft, calming blue. There were shelves lined with art supplies, expensive paints, charcoal sets, sketch pads of every size. In the corner on an easel was a framed drawing I had made when I was 6 years old, a crude crayon sketch of me and him holding hands. "She told me you didn't want me," I whispered, staring at the drawing. "She said you left because I was too much work." Richard's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "She lied," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "I didn't leave Alexis. I was erased. She filed restraining orders based on fabrications. She intercepted my letters. She told the courts I was unstable because I work in cybersecurity and value privacy. I've spent 10 years fighting to see you, and every time she found a new legal loophole to block me, I walked over to the easel and touched the crayon drawing. The wax was faded, but the connection was still there. I looked at the high-end sketch pads, the kind I used to drool over in art supply stores but could never afford. He knew. All this time he knew who I was. "I didn't think anyone was coming," I said, my voice trembling. "I will always come," he said. "And now that you're here, no one is ever going to hurt you again, I promise." As I stood in that room, surrounded by proof of a love I had been told didn't exist, I felt a heavy, invisible chain snap inside my chest. The chain that had tethered me to Angela's approval, to her narrative, to her cruelty. It was gone. I wasn't her victim anymore. I was his daughter. And I was safe. For 6 days, I lived in a kind of suspended animation. The fortress, as I started calling it, was a world unto itself. It was quiet, ordered, and safe, everything my life with Angela had not been. I slept in a bed that felt like a cloud. I ate meals prepared by a chef who asked me what I liked, a question that stumped me the first 3 times. I spent hours in the art room sketching the jagged coastline, trying to capture the way the waves crashed against the rocks below. Richard gave me space, but he was always there, a steady presence in the periphery, checking in without hovering. It was the first time in my life I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. But peace, I learned, is fragile when you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. It happened on Saturday morning. I was sitting on the terrace, sketching a hawk circling the cliffs when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a notification. Mom. My stomach clenched, that old conditioned reflex of fear. I stared at the message preview. "Hope the house is clean. We'll be back Sunday. Don't forget to defrost the chicken." I read it twice. There was no mention of the airport. No. "Are you okay?" No. "Did you make it back?" Just an order. A command from a general to a soldier she assumed was still stationed at her post. She truly believed I was sitting in that empty suburban house waiting for her return like a good little accessory. She thought her power over me was absolute. Then came the Instagram notification. "Angela, H tagged you in a post." I opened the app. There it was, a carousel of photos from Santorini, the whitewashed buildings, the azure sea, the perfect sunsets. And there, in every frame, was the perfect family. Angela, Kevin, and his 2 kids, all smiling, all tan, all happy. The caption read, "So blessed to make memories with my whole world. Family is everything." She had tagged me. She had tagged the daughter she abandoned in an airport terminal in a photo she wasn't even in. It was a power move. A public declaration that I existed only as a digital prop to bolster her image of the devoted mother, while in reality she had erased me. I looked at the pixelated smile on my screen. It didn't hurt. It just looked fake. The anger that settled in my chest wasn't hot or messy. It was cold. It was the clarity of a judge passing a sentence. She had no remorse. She wasn't worried about me. She was annoyed that she would have to deal with the mess of me when she returned. She thought she could just pick up where she left off, using me as her punching bag and her maid. I walked into Richard's study. He was on a conference call, but he hung up the moment he saw my face. She texted. I said, my voice flat. I showed him the phone. Richard read the text. Then he looked at the Instagram post. His expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He set the phone down on his desk with a deliberate, heavy click. "She thinks you're still playing by her rules," he said. "She thinks I'm property," I corrected. "Properties can be repossessed," Richard said. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick legal file. "And tenants can be evicted." He looked at me, and for the first time I didn't see just a father. I saw a titan of industry, a man who dismantled competitors for a living. "Are you ready?" he asked. I looked at the photo of my mother smiling in Greece, living her best life on stolen time. "Yes," I said. "Burn it down." Richard motioned for me to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. He didn't offer comfort or platitudes. He offered strategy. He opened the file he had pulled from the drawer and slid it across the polished mahogany surface. "Do you know who owns the penthouse your mother lives in?" he asked. "Kevin," I said. "He's a real estate investor. Mom always brags about how he bought it for them." Richard's lips quirked into a dry, humorless smile. "Kevin is a real estate investor in the same way I'm a computer guy. He dabbles, he leverages, but he doesn't own that penthouse. He never did." He tapped the document in front of me. I looked down. It was a property deed. The legal language was dense, but the names at the top were clear. The Alexis Trust. "I bought that building 12 years ago," Richard said. "When your mother and I divorced, I put the penthouse into a trust for you. The terms were simple. Angela could live there as your primary caregiver until you turned 18, provided she maintained a moral standard of care. It was my way of ensuring you always had a roof over your head no matter what happened to me." My mind reeled. The marble floors, the sweeping city views, the address, Angela flaunted to her friends as proof of her social climbing. It all belonged to me. "She's a tenant," I whispered. "A tenant on goodwill." "Exactly," Richard said. "And by abandoning you at an airport to go on a vacation she couldn't afford, she violated the morality clause of the trust. She breached her fiduciary duty as a caregiver. Legally, she evicted herself the moment she walked through that security checkpoint." He pulled out another document, an eviction notice. It wasn't the standard 30-day warning. It was an immediate revocation of privileges based on breach of contract. "This isn't revenge," Alexis Richard said, his voice level. "This is contract enforcement. She broke the rules. Now she faces the penalties." He handed me a pen. It felt heavy in my hand, cold metal against my skin. "You are the beneficiary," he said. "It's your decision. Do we enforce the contract?" I thought about the years of being treated like a servant in my own home. I thought about Kevin's kids getting the big bedrooms while I slept in the small office. I thought about the $85. "She thinks she's untouchable," I said. "She's about to find out she's homeless," Richard replied. I looked at the signature line. Beneficiary approval. I didn't hesitate. I signed my name. The ink flowed dark and permanent. It felt less like signing a document and more like signing a death warrant for the life I used to know. But as I set the pen down, I didn't feel guilt. I felt powerful. "Good," Richard said, closing the file. "Now let's look at the financials." Before the ink on the eviction notice was even dry, Richard's phone buzzed. It was a message from his forensic accountant, a man named Sterling, who Richard said could find a missing penny in a billion-dollar budget. Richard read the message, and for the first time I saw genuine shock register on his face. Not anger, shock. "What is it?" I asked. He turned the screen toward me. It was a digital copy of a bank withdrawal slip, dated 3 days before the trip. Amount $24,000, from an account labeled Alexis Emergency Medical Fund. "I set this up when you were born," Richard said, his voice dangerously quiet. "It was for catastrophic emergencies only. Surgery, life-saving treatment. It required dual signatures for any withdrawal over $5,000. I looked at the signature line. Richard Sterling was signed in a looping, hesitant hand that looked nothing like his sharp, angular scrawl. Beneath it, Angela Sterling. "She forged my signature," he said. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Eviction was a civil matter. It was messy, sure, but it was just property. This was a felony. This was grand larceny and forgery. "She stole your medical fund to pay for a cruise," Richard stated the words, heavy and final. "She didn't just abandon you, Alexis. She robbed you to finance her abandonment." I stared at the slip. $24,000. That was the price of my safety. That was the cushion meant to save my life if I got sick, if I got hurt. And she had liquidated it for a balcony suite and shore excursions. "She's not just a bad mother," I whispered. "She's a criminal." Any lingering thread of doubt, any tiny voice in my head saying maybe she just made a mistake, maybe I'm being too harsh, was severed. You don't accidentally forge a signature. You don't accidentally drain a medical fund. You do it with intent. You do it because you believe you won't get caught. You do it because you don't care who gets hurt as long as you get your vacation. Richard picked up the desk phone. He didn't dial a lawyer this time. He dialed the district attorney's office. He knew the DA. They played golf, Frank Richards said when the line connected. I have a case of fraud and forgery I need to report. It involves a minor's trust fund. Yes, I have the documents. Yes, the perpetrator is currently out of the country. He paused, listening, his eyes locked on mine. Yes, she'll be returning on Sunday. I think you'll want to have someone waiting at the airport. No, not to arrest her immediately. Let her come home first. Let her find the locks changed. Let her realize she has nowhere to go. Then pick her up. He hung up. The trap is set, Richard said. When she lands, she won't just be homeless. She'll be a fugitive. I looked at the forged signature again. It was sloppy, arrogant. It was the handwriting of someone who thought she owned the world and everyone in it. She always said I was expensive, I said, a dark laugh bubbling up in my throat. I guess she finally decided to cash me out. Richard reached across the desk and took the paper from me. He crumpled it into a ball and tossed it into the wastebasket. She cashed out her future, he said. Not yours. Sunday afternoon. The penthouse lobby was quiet, the kind of hushed, expensive silence you pay a premium for. The concierge, a man named Davis, who had always smiled at Angela, stood behind the marble desk, his expression carefully neutral. I wasn't in the lobby. I was 20 miles away, safe in Richard's fortress, watching the security feed on a tablet. Richard sat beside me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. Angela swept through the revolving doors, dragging her Louis Vuitton luggage behind her. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and oversized sunglasses, looking every inch the wealthy socialite returning from her European tour. Kevin trailed behind her, looking sunburnt and tired. She walked up to the private elevator bank and pressed her key fob against the sensor. Beep, beep. A red light flashed. She frowned, pressing it again. Harder. Beep, beep. Davis, she called out, annoyance sharpening her voice. The elevator is broken again. Davis didn't move from behind the desk. The elevator is working perfectly, Mrs. Sterling, he said. His voice was polite but cold. Your access has been revoked. Angela froze. She took off her sunglasses, her eyes narrowing. Excuse me, I live here. This is my home. Not anymore, Davis said. He picked up a tablet from the desk and held it out. Someone would like to speak with you. On the screen, Angela saw my face. I was sitting in Richard's study, surrounded by books and art, looking calm, collected, and utterly untouchable. Alexis, she gasped. Where are you? Why are you? You didn't lose your key, Angela, I said. My voice was steady, amplified by the lobby speakers so everyone could hear. You lost your lease. The trust has been revoked. What are you talking about? She shrieked, looking around as if expecting a prank crew to jump out. Kevin owns this building. Kevin owns a leased BMW and a lot of debt, Richard's voice cut in from off-screen. He leaned into the frame. I own the building. And the penthouse was held in a trust for Alexis's benefit. A trust that required you to be a fit parent. Angela's face went white. She looked at Kevin, who was suddenly very interested in his shoes. You abandoned the beneficiary at an airport, I continued. You violated the morality clause. You evicted yourself. You can't do this, she screamed, her composure shattering. My clothes, my jewelry, everything I own is up there. Your personal effects have been boxed and placed in storage, Richard said. You can retrieve them once the police are done inventorying the premises for evidence. Police, she whispered. For the $24,000 you stole from my emergency medical fund, I said. Forging a signature is a felony, Mom. They're on their way now. The color drained from her face completely. She looked at her luggage, the only things she had left in the world. She looked at the opulent lobby she had treated as her personal kingdom. And then she looked at the screen, at the daughter she had thrown away like trash. Alexis, please, she begged, her voice cracking. I'm your mother. No, I said. You were my baggage. And I finally checked you. I tapped the screen. The connection cut. The screen went black. On the security feed, I watched her crumble, sinking onto her designer suitcase in the middle of the lobby, weeping not for me, but for the life she had just lost. I turned off the tablet. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I felt light. Let's go get dinner, Richard said, standing up. I think we have something to celebrate. Yeah, I said, standing up and walking out of the room without looking back. Freedom. 3 months later, the headlines had mostly faded, but the consequences remained. Angela was awaiting trial for fraud and forgery, living out of a motel room, paid for by a public defender's assistance fund. Kevin had filed for divorce the moment the assets were frozen, claiming he was a victim of deception. He didn't fight for the kids. He just fought to keep his leased car. I didn't visit her. I didn't write letters. I didn't send money. I had spent 16 years trying to fill the void inside her with my own compliance, and it had nearly drowned me. I wasn't going to make that mistake again. I was in the art studio at the Fortress, the morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The easel held a large canvas I had been working on for weeks. It was a charcoal sketch of the airport terminal, the high ceilings, the cold metal benches, the exit signs. But there was a difference. In the center of the frame where my mother had once stood in my memory, there was only empty space. I had erased her. I had drawn myself instead, standing tall, holding a phone to my ear, looking not at the woman walking away, but at the horizon beyond the glass. Richard walked in carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He stood beside me, looking at the drawing. "It's finished," he said. "Yeah," I replied, wiping charcoal dust from my hands. "It is. What are you going to call it?" I looked at the girl in the sketch. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't baggage. She was the architect of her own rescue. "The departure," I said. "Or maybe, the arrival." Richard smiled, handing me a mug. "I like that better. How does it feel?" I took a sip of coffee, looking out at the ocean crashing against the cliffs below. The world was wide and open and waiting. I had a father who loved me, a home that was safe, and a future that belonged entirely to me. "It feels like I can finally breathe," I said. I picked up an eraser and brushed away a stray smudge near the edge of the canvas, the last shadow of a life I had outgrown. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't pity her. I just didn't need her. "I'm ready," I said, turning away from the easel. "For what?" Richard asked. "For everything else. If you've ever had to cut ties to save your own sanity, share this story. You are not alone, and you are not baggage. Hit follow for more stories of justice served.